as I understand it now, Francesca, we are now going to add 2 more people to our wonderful 5 panelists. And Joel Chang is going to join us, right, in this discussion. He is an architect and director of the PNT Group in Hong Kong. Joel? And yes, hi? No,
hi,
did
hi.
I do something wrong? It's hard.
Yes.
It's hard. I can see everybody. All right, and I am now looking for Philip Clarke. Where's Philip?
He's also here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, you're in the oval. There you are. Hi.
Hi.
And Phil Clarke, it says on his thing, a project director in digital placemaking at the Oval Partnership in Hong Kong. And you know, maybe one way to start would be to ask Joel Chang or Phil Clarke, do you want to start by reflecting on the presentations we've just heard and tell us sort of what kinds of questions or thoughts it generated for you?
Yeah, thank you. So maybe I also introduce myself briefly. Apart from practicing as an architect and urban designer in this region, I am also actually the immediate past president of the Hong Kong Institute of Urban Design. And I actually also sitting in a number of government committees on planning and also urban design. So thanks for all the speaker, and it's a wonderful sharing. And well, my observation is most of the good example shown by all the 5 speakers, they are actually ad hoc projects. It's actually some of them are individual initiatives like Andre or Francisco. You also have a lot of this sort of project, but most of these actually are quite discrete and disconnected, and some were actually created through organic growth, or some actually are mercy of the developer. They sacrifice some of their financial benefit, or they are willing to spend a fortune to employ a better designer like OMA we just see. So to me, all this I would say are not really bottom-up approach. A good bottom-up approach, I think, to me, should be part of the entire structural approach of the governance, instead of just rely on individual initiatives. And if we are not having a structural approach, we actually could not enable all these creative things to happen and flourish. So this is an unfortunate thing. So actually all these example review, we are not yet there. And amongst the 12 cities, 12 plus 2, 11 plus 2, we call in Greater Bay Area. 9 is mainland city, and plus Hong Kong and Macau. So my observations among all the cities, Shenzhen is doing better amongst all of us. But actually they are adopting is a top-down approach, not really a bottom-up approach as well. But I think this approach in Shenzhen, although they are creating a lot of good urban design examples through their design competition. Sorry, my phone just rang. So they through urban design competition, they procure a lot of good projects, and amongst all the cities in the Greater Bay Area, they are doing good and doing quite well. But in fact, one thing they are missing is they are not actually doing, I think it's still not doing good in so-called engaging the community, that sort of things in that process of procuring urban design project. So they also still have can do better, I would say. So now I think that the situation now in Hong Kong is we are not very good actually in procuring urban design scale project, and traditionally we have been stuck in the way we procure a project is full engineering lead project. One of the way that our and Setha, the British, when we are a British colony, the way how they plan the city, they plan the city based on commercial efficiency, based on numbers, but not actually really about the livability and quality of the space in the city. So we are still struggling to get away from this traditional way of doing things. And I noticed one of the speaker has used the poster that we have set up, the Urban Designer Alliance. It's actually is one of the initiatives that the Hong Kong Institute of Urban Designer trying to break through this situation, try to mainstreaming urban design principle into the policy making. And because our governance actually get stuck with the traditional approach and not really concerned too much about using urban design principle to plan our cities. So what we are trying to do is to try to engage all the other Greater Bay Area cities to come together to form an alliance to try to promote the principle of urban design in a higher tier level rather than in a regional, rather than in a city level. So that is the initiative that we are trying to get away from this traditional approach, and we hope through the change of the mentality of the governance, then we embrace, of course, we can embrace different approach. Top-down approach has its merit. Bottom-up approach also has its merit, and actually they could be merged together in the procurement of urban design scale project. So today we have a lot of knowledgeable speaker here, and I think it would be good if friends from the state and Europe can share with us how your cities in your countries deal with our situations like us, where we are still trying to struggle to get away from the very traditional way of planning our cities. So thank you. Back to you. You're mute.
I try to mute so you don't hear. I'd like to turn, if that's all right, to Phil Clarke. Do you want to offer your perspective? And then if we want to take questions from the audience, is there a way to do that, Francesco?
Yeah, I think we can ask from the Melody to collect the chat. So
okay.
If people want to ask questions, I think can write on the chat, so we will see the relevant questions maybe.
All right, and it's also possible the panelists may want to respond to what Joel Chang and Phil Clarke said too. So I'll give you, I promise to give everyone an opportunity. Phil Clarke, Oval, it says, would you like to share any insights with us about the talks we've just had?
Sure. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks to Francesco for organising this. Thanks to Chinese U, who we at Oval Partnership have been collaborating on and continue to collaborate on in practice. So I thought I'd kind of, I'm an architect, have been for 20 plus years now, and Oval have been operating in the region in Hong Kong, the Greater Bay Area, China, mainland China, for 30, 40 years now. So we've got a good perspective really of the contrast. I think what we're seeing today is a very clear kind of summary of the framing of the debate, the challenges that we face, and also the different sort of scales of operation. So We at Oval spend a lot of time making places and doing a lot of research to understand the grassroots and the bottom-up approach. So we have a range of companies that work in Hong Kong, which are public advocacy companies that actually kind of tease out the community voice and create structures to actually make sure that that's clear and manifest and can be kind of delivered upon so that credible public realms can exist. As Hendrik says, in Hong Kong, we have very particular condition in terms of public space and so on. And a lot of interstitial spaces have to be very carefully nurtured and explored to sort of bring them to the use of the public. But over the years, in fact, as has been clearly explained, the GBA as an initiative encompasses vastly different conditions on the ground here. And we've had the good fortune of working with some larger scale clients and from the ground up. And we have very different solutions that we find. So we have to be very adaptable and flexible to kind of implement those. And I think that's one of the keys, is really getting in those early stages and teasing out the voices of the community. So one of the, here at Oval, I'm in charge of urban analytics and digital placemaking. And this is an initiative which gives us a sort of range of toolkits to provide evidence-based design and evidence-based research on the urban condition on the ground, which allows us very much to feed into the larger scale. So when we're working with larger clients, often we're involved in design competitions, and what we bring is this particular approach to tackle the strategic urbanism design approach. And we found increasing acceptance and desire to make sure that projects are successful longer term, a rapid kind of increase in sophistication from clients in terms of wanting to understand what the kind of longer term rollout strategy for these projects are. And obviously big data and urban analytics allows us to understand the way the city is likely to develop and the trajectory of change, and start to seed in and make sure that the placemaking is there and it's strong and robust, and a credible public realm is created, essentially to create a framework for future-proofing developments and sustain and seed a kind of robust vibrancy in place. So that's something that I think is a very useful approach, and I really enjoyed the experiences. One of the key things, what the key certainty here is change and difference across the region, and we can see increasing sophistication, which is sort of an upside, if you like, to what we're seeing. So.
Muting. There is a lot of background noise. We do have a question from I have one from the audience. Do panelists want to have a moment to respond first to what Joel Chang and Phil Clarke mentioned? Silence. It's hard, you know, it's always hard with Zoom. Let's start. All right, Hendrik, please.
Yeah, I think that, of course, I totally agree with Joel Chan. And that many of those things that we showed is very piecemeal, right? So we are not assuming that this is necessarily the answer. I'm more maybe reflecting on, and I could talk more about the kind of hurdles also of this. However, one thing that I find interesting in Hong Kong, that there is, and I try to say this also, that it's a whole ecology, right, of groups where we are a kind of small part of it, and that makes actually that's quite interesting in Hong Kong, which maybe people from outside might not all know. And it would probably just need also the right interfaces, right, to be connected to other forms of projects. And that's was one reason why, for example, we spent a bit of time to travel to Mia Drag and study, for example, the public plaza program in New York, right? Which, despite all the problems with maybe Bloomberg at his time, that was really an interesting program because it allowed all those kind of different civil society groups and even much more even bottom-up groups maybe than university professors only and so on to get engaged and contribute to make better public spaces. And that could be, for example, one of those things where all of a sudden those things, those kind of combinations or this bottom-up, top-down could work better. In Hong Kong, we have also those programs, but they can be, I think, more opened up and made a bit better. So yeah.
Well, that's one of the questions from Jia Ping Lee. I'm so sorry about my pronunciation. She loved the comments from Joel, but her question is, how do we enable both bottom up and top down to exist in a way that is a win-win for the community as well as the local government? And Hendrik, that's what you're trying to say, is you're saying that's still missing. Is that my understanding of what you're saying, is that we're seeing these bits and fragments? And Margaret was also, I thought, pointing out all the vitality on the ground, and yet at the same time, we were seeing, well, Inge and Miodrag were showing us these huge sort of the public space of, vacuous public spaces, totally empty of people, that there is this incredible unevenness. Any other panelists want to respond? Otherwise, I have one more question from the audience.
I also want to say something, Setha, because I think there's something.
All right, Miodrag and then Inge. Okay. All right.
I want just to say that also there's a discussion I will bring in about this things of making place. We didn't discuss if it's public or private. I think there's a lot of hybridities that even Margaret showed, right? So the places can be also in some private space, or at least some more blur space, I would say. So I think it's another things I wanted to bring into the discussion. Just this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, from my point of view, this whole question of is there public space and is that the right term to be using in this discussion at all, which all of you touched on, seems really important. Inge, you were going to, yes?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks also to the other speakers. What I'm interested in is if anybody has come across good examples. For example, Margaret and also Hendrik's examples that you showed there, they're usually in the old town, although I know that Hendrik also worked in the new town. But the new towns, of course, in Hong Kong, for example, but also in the Greater Bay, are the large-scale developments. And again, the stuff that Miodrag is looking at, the stuff that I showed, they're all massive developments where it's, I think, much more difficult to bring in this kind of local scale sort of self-initiated developments. So I'm wondering if anybody has from the panelists or others have good examples of this, where the city is actually within a couple of years after, let's say, its construction, is already starting to be taken over by people who actually live there.
Does anybody have an answer? Sort of in the new, is this happening in some of these new spaces? I mean, one of my questions, one of my thoughts about this is that we can't really judge yet. I think things aren't old enough. I mean, doesn't a certain amount of sedimentation have to happen? And also even local people organizing on the ground, it takes a certain amount of encounter. I don't have a good sense of the time dimensions here, but aren't these very new spaces? I mean, again, I don't know anything about it. We have a comment here. Cities can be viewed from different levels. This is Sunjata's iPad. Cities can be viewed from different levels: aerial view, neighborhood view, building view, ground level view, and top-down, bottom-up approaches, where different factors come into play. If it is difficult to make a difference in one city, how are we going to make this happen in GBA and 11 cities and beyond? Oh, well, we're going to try. We're going to do better. We're going to push harder. Does anyone want to? Margaret, please.
This is not a response to that question.
Oh,
but
fine. That's all right.
the
That's
previous
okay.
one to Inga's, and I want to say that I can't really comment on Hong Kong, but certainly in places in the greater Guangzhou region, once the deterioration, new place, for example, gated communities, almost all housing is in gated communities. And once they have deteriorated below a certain level, you actually see, even in vast gated communities, a lot of very interesting things happening.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, all of a sudden the gates become much looser, and the economic circumstances of the people living there are very different, and they turn into something quite different than what they were planned for. So I think what Setha said about you need time and something.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
I've had PhD student work in gated communities in the suburbs of Beijing. I don't know this region, but they a quite rich, a very rich, informal, very complicated social environment did evolve over time, even among the gated community residents and the leftover villagers who had been sort of pushed out of their land to build these gated communities of the local village. So really very interesting mixings of people and activities, but it does take time. It doesn't happen immediately. And again, how sustained it is, I don't know. And whether, I think, Joel Chang, if I understand you correctly, will it get structured in, or will, in other words, if something happens at the bottom up that is productive, will it remain? Will it be supported in some way? Maybe I misunderstood you, but Hendrik has his hand up.
Sorry, I was already saying something, but I just wanted to follow up on this one, because for the new town, I think what we were, of course, very interested by studying new towns, because those kind of tactical intervention is just one part, but to see like how can we make sure that in new town planning, for example, local economy and so on, street shops and so on come back, and we see like after writing a lot of papers, they were actually quoted, and then now for Hung Shue Q, for example, they are started to be planned there. They come actually back on the perimeter and so on. So of course one has to work on many different levels, and sometimes it's more framework and sometimes it's more tactical, right? Yeah. Okay.
Well, and rules and regulations. Joel Cheng, I had sort of said, I don't know if that's what you meant by structures.
Yeah, actually, the problem now is we see a number of these good initiatives around the town, mainly actually by individuals or academics, but the unfortunate thing is the system that we procure the design of our city, that doesn't actually so-called embrace or encourage all these things happening. So I think I'm not saying all this work done by all these Hendrik and Francisco, all meaningful things to have a good demonstration. But the ideal system should be the entire governance and the entire system. So I call it structural approach. That we procure a system would embrace a top-down as well as a bottom-up approach. I don't see this is a mutually exclusive things, and this is what actually the Hong Kong Institute of Urban Design is trying to push to the government to put in more urban design thinking into the process of procuring all these coming urban design scale project. And just for example, we are going to reclaim a big piece of land in the Lantau area in the western side of Hong Kong, and so-called to create a big new central business district. But the way how the government procure is still mainly is an engineering lead. But in fact, there's opportunity that we could engage the so-called the bottom-up approach as well into the process. And what we are trying to lobbying the government is, in fact, in the process, we could engage the community more. We could engage the various stakeholders and also the younger generation through design competition to actually look at different possible vision for the area before we actually come down to the numbers and the so-called the engineering feasibility study. So, well, the government actually kind of heard what we said, but not take it totally. They also have design competition, but they just put it at the end of after finishing the engineering study. So, but that this is a good move, but it's still not adequate. So I see this actually they are not mutually exclusive, but it still need the effort of everyone's to try to change the game rule of game, and all the things that now we can see today the speaker show all these good example would help. And of course there are a lot of things that we can still do, for example educating the public about the importance of placemaking, etc. So all this would help to change the what I say the rule of games in future. And I hope I answered one of the questions. Yeah.
Linton, I'm going to take one question from Narita and then I'll turn to you. All right? I mean, wait, because she can't. I mean, unless she can speak. It's Dan. Dan Narita says, I would like to ask the panelists whether there are emerging civil society groups or professional organizations which work on creating better relationships between bottom-up and top-down initiatives, and how can better synergies be orchestrated between bottom-up and top-down developments. We're all asking the same question. How? Yin Fen, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Setha. I'm not so sure if I can answer the question, or maybe last one of my observation about Hong Kong, but I need to go back a little bit because I'm originally from Taiwan. And in Taiwan, we, in a governmental structure, we have a very special role in the government called village chief. And even it's very similar to the district councilor in Hong Kong. And this village chief, it seems like they have some annual fund from the government, and also they have no approach and a way to apply for much more monies from the government to do their placemaking projects, no matter what's that is in different places. And so every time I'm just wondering about, because it's very this role is a little bit similar to the district councilor in Hong Kong. And as we see, like in Henry and my presentation, we can see like in the case too, Ida Wang, she used to be a very powerful district councilor, and later she tried to organize all these professionals and also these students together to try to make bridge the bottom-up and top-down approaches to do this placemaking. And my second thought is about, because in Taiwan now we are not only talking about the placemaking or making place, we even try to think about the concept about the community engagement, because it seems like that's a much more harder part. You need to find a way to engage with the community, then get the trust from the community, then the people will really want to tell you what's their thought about their place and what they want to make for their public space or private space. So maybe I'm just wondering, maybe we can think about this direction, and no matter, because I'm not so sure about the situation in Shenzhen or Guangzhou. So maybe I'm just wondering to hear from other panelists about, do they have this kind of community engagement or that kind of a role in government, like a district councillor or region chief, and they can really work like a mediator during the process? Thank you.
Mia Drag, do you want to say something about New York? I see you nodding your head.
I don't know if the question is, well, I see Phil also has his hand up.
Okay,
so
well, do you want to let Phil, do you want to ask your question? Okay, Phil?
Sure, yeah, I thought I'd just try and respond to Dan's point really about emerging professional organisations. I think over the decades, we at Oval have recognised the need for, in the Hong Kong situation primarily, but then also sort of more widely, the importance of professional organisations to step up to actually kind of create. So we've actually set up a number of companies that are very Hong Kong charities, which are there to actually encourage and engender community-based support for projects, and that's active and ongoing. Obviously, I haven't got an opportunity now to sort of talk in more detail about that, but very much it has been left for a number of kind of forward-thinking companies, architects and urbanists to try and bridge that gap, to try and synergize between the bottom up and bring those kind of those opportunities and those grassroots and thoughts and coherent community to the developers and so on. And a lot of the time we've found very good responses from a number of developers we've worked with over the decades who do want to interface with that. So it is a case of bringing the two parties together. And we've had some successful outcomes in Hong Kong. In terms of the larger picture, in terms of going back a couple of steps, in terms of when we'll see this happen in some of the newer emerging cities such as Shenzhen, I think the two-pronged approach would be very much to build a credible public realm with the right human scale street section. Essentially, scale is absolutely key in that principle. Occupiable, vibrant ground floor is really good, strong urban design that can create the framework. That, along with the right clients who understand the importance of curating events and actually bringing people to the space with an ongoing remit to change and tinker and adjust. So that's something that we are seeing. Yeah. We can't share any of that with you right now, but I think you'll see over the next couple of years the way in which the sort of maturing approach to public realm will really pay dividends, because it's very measurable. As I said before, when you do the analytics, you can see the measured footfall increases, and that will directly be evidence for the clients to sort of do the right thing, essentially.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I keep thinking about is how can we get the private sector more interested in trying to bottom up, but to get people involved and really set up situations in which there is the kind of engagement we're all talking about, instead of leaving them out of it. I mean, I hear a lot about government, but I also, at least hearing in the Hong Kong situation, that the private sector is playing a big role. It's getting to be a little after 2 hours. We're at 11 p.m. here in New York, so I think we should do maybe a Francesco, kind of a last round of people comments. If anyone wants to add anything, I think we have developed some pretty clear themes of where this group would want to go, which is on trying to the bottom up, top down integration and what it would be. Questions of whether, I think, keep coming up about public space in this context and what that means and the public space versus public spaces, the kind of very complicated, integrated, somewhat insurgent, everyday urbanism that you're seeing on the ground, and how it gets integrated into these large-scale meta-regional plans. There's a lot of talk, and Phil Clarke keeps about, urban design, but, to me as the anthropologist, urban design can be everything from these mega region kinds of landscapes that you're showing me, all the way down to very fine grain, fine grain kind of, as you were saying, curating and programming and all the things that one would really need to do to create a people place, a real place in some of these landscapes. So I think there's some very interesting questions. I thought we didn't come back to the difference between the academic point of view and the practitioner, and that Inge is bringing up. And I could certainly see, as the pure academic over here, how I would do things differently, and even to Phil Clarke, I was thinking, I'm really strongly feeling with the sort of big data requires ethnographic ground truthing, and we haven't really worked out how that's going to happen for urban design either. So, I mean, I think that there are some important and provocative questions here. I think it's sort of still fragmented, and I guess as this is the opening conference, right? This is our opening the session, and I guess what's going to start happening is these questions will be worked out and talked about as moved along. Unfortunately, I have to go to sleep, so probably Miodrag, you're going to stay up for a little while longer, but
no, I'll join tomorrow morning at 8.
Yeah, I'm going to join too. I'll get up early tomorrow morning, but I'll probably crash.
I'm sorry, yes, but 2 a.m. Is not my favorite conference time. So
yeah,
I apologize.
It's so hard. I have to say, though, to all of you, I'm so grateful that there are some times where we can all come together, because I've never been so engaged in questions in Asia and Asian cities. I really wanted to talk more about Taiwan, because part of the representation stuff that's going on in Taiwan has to do with the history of rebellion and indigenous peoples moving to the city and having certain rights to spaces that I don't know, that I was just reading about. So there's some really interesting differences here, but for the first time, I feel like I can listen to you and engage with your really fascinating issues and this incredible scale of design. Anyone else want to offer? That's sort of my little ending. Hendrik's looking at me with a big smile. Why are you smiling at me? Just giving you some of the themes I hear, Any other ending things?
I have said,
please.
Maybe Miodrag or Margaret, do you want to still add something?
Yeah.
Okay, Margaret, would you like to go first, or shall I?
No, I'll say something. You can see it's getting dark here. My face is disappearing. Yeah, I think I actually was very interested in the Hong Kong examples and discussion. And the thing, again, as in my title, I'm really struck by is the extreme differences. The circumstances of organizing, publicness in different ways in Hong Kong is completely different than it is in the mainland of China. Obviously, Shenzhen is very different than Guangzhou. And so I think that, again, the key issue is specificity and difference. And I would just like to also say that the number of feet on the ground does not represent good public space. And that is the problem with big data, that it really lacks the, again, ethnographic dimension of who these feet belong to and what they are doing. So I would just urge for more exploration of the specificity and difference in understanding these issues, and even the intersection of top down and bottom up are really complex and highly specific.
Miodrag.
I fully agree. I just can add very briefly that, in fact, one of the things that Ying-Fen and Hendrik also mentioned in their presentation is this, one of the key lines for me is the capabilities for self-organization. And I think that's really where the differences are. In fact, this may not be true, but in my experience, top-down always somehow works analogically. Bottom-up always works differently. And what applies here may not apply in the next neighborhood, may not apply in the next municipality, let alone in Hong Kong. So this specificity that I think Margaret also points out to, these specificities is something that's exactly why I have been actually extremely hesitant and have written this thing with a very shaky hand. Precisely because what Margaret mentioned also in the opening line of her presentation. And this is because, you know, it's like as much as you learn, you still don't know enough even about your own neighborhood. And imagine me now sitting in the Bronx writing about Greater Bay Area. You know, so having, you know what I mean? And I have friends in the GBA, I have friends here who know about it. I have read the literature, anything I could get my hands on. And still I know so little about what is actually going on the ground and have very little understanding. So what I said, I really want to say comes out of also a point of a foreigner's gaze, a point of ignorance, but a point of keen interest as well. And in investment, a long-term investment in actually trying to understand what is going on, not because I really want to understand what is going on in order to create a theory of it, but because I'm a designer and an educator, and I really would like to actually be able to operationalize this knowledge and teach people how to in fact design inclusive, equitable, and after all,
exactly,
or whatever that's worse, democratic public spaces. And I think what is really interesting here, what I've learned through this process very briefly is that the things that I teach here, public space, civil society, it just doesn't apply. It doesn't even apply in my home country, right? In my home city of Belgrade, it just doesn't apply. There's no such a thing as civil society to speak of. But there has to be something that you may call it civil society or not. And I think this goes back to Mr. Chan's comments. There needs to be some sort of a social space based on voluntary participation in which people themselves organize so that they can not only satisfy their own needs, but go beyond that to aspire to become or take part in or form a public. And that's why public space, as Margaret pointed out a number of times, this public space is not open space. Public space may not be even an adequate term to be used in many of the cases we describe. Making places does not necessarily, I'm guilty because I talked about public space in the conference on making places, but making places doesn't necessarily mean making public spaces. And so I think that there needs to be a really clear distinction. What constitutes public? How is public formed? And who and how, under what conditions actually really gets together and organize a public? And hopefully in this space, social space of voluntary participation, there will be multiple publics and not one. And these publics will actually will have to start from somewhere. And that's why, for example, this whole literature on governance that looks for weak signals, the signals of the people who actually are themselves engaged in actually, like the Bishop Hill example. People who actually, now, who in the government in Hong Kong has the ear for that? That is the question, and how that actually be escalated, and where and how that kind of initiative actually gets to meet the top down, not necessarily top down, but some form of a government entity and so on and so forth. So these are the questions that are elemental. They're elemental in New York as much as they're in Hong Kong and many other places. And that's why it becomes interesting. This work is really interesting because you never stop learning because it evolves all the time. It's a moving target.
Yeah. And of course, the minute you put some structure on it or, begin to model it up, sometimes we lose it. I mean, we know that here from New York, we know it from Latin America, that you can lose. It's very fragile. These ecology, that's one of the things that doesn't come up so much, but these are fragile ecologies. They can be wiped out as quickly as they're made, and government intervention sometimes can be too heavy-handed. I mean, sometimes they don't scale up, sometimes they don't scale down. Well,
thank you, Setha, for moderating so wonderfully. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Setha.
Well, thank you so much. Let me just thank this wonderful panel. And how about this incredible audience that, from my point of view, is staying up in the middle of the night. But I mean, I know you're really all wide awake and ready to go on, but you've been with us this whole time. Thank you so much to our two expert I guess we called them your a panelist. That was really exciting to have you come in and offer a sort of professional local perspective. Thank you to Margaret and Miodrag and Inge and Hendrik and Lynn Fenn and all of you. And thank you so much, Francesco, for bringing us all together on this wonderful occasion, and good luck with the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much. I just want to say